Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zygot Press. My name is Yana, and I'm responsible for exhibitions and art gallery and art residency here. And because of this special year, we run this very nice and special exhibition. This is our first exhibition of the year, Pocho, with lovely artists here, all of them here. And it was curated by Lauren Cardenas. And Brittany will run you through the whole exhibition. I will have my 5 minutes to just introduce Zygot Press a little bit. We'll give you a little tour in the Zygot. And also, this exhibition was possible with the support of Ohio Art Council. And usually we run like 2 open calls for the proposals. And this exhibition was approved through our committee 2 years ago. So welcome to Zygot. I will just give you a little tour. Right now we stay in a gallery. So if everything will be like usually in the life, you will be here, guys. See, it's our beautiful walls here. And I will go through our, we still have like an announcement of the exhibition. It's like, hello, we are here. It's like we are live. So I'm going through our little nice setup shop. In Zygot, we have a beautiful space for the professional printmaking artists to work in different printmaking techniques. We have 2 beautiful American French tools. It's a etching presses. Like we have a very big beds for prints. We have our little nice Charlie Brand, I'm sorry. We have our special room for photopolymer production. Right now it's very dark, sorry. But it's really nice to work here because we set up everything in a very spacey way. So you can do etching here. You can work in lithography. And of course, you can work in a silk screen production. So we have like plenty frames, and we have our room, like a washroom. And of course, we have our special letterpress department with a chandelier and prize, like a very nice guy here, 2 Wonder Cooks presses, and very nicely set up of fonts and types. So for me, I would say this is it for the little tour of Zygot. We are always welcome you guys to stopping by in a different time. And right now I'm passing to the Brittany Hudak. She is our administrative officer for the programming and art writer, like one of the best in Cleveland. And yeah, she is. And yeah, you are so welcome here. Okay.
Thanks, Yana. Thanks for giving us a little peek at Zygot. We really miss having the community. You know, the whole point of Zygot is it's a collaborative printmaking studio. So it's been challenging. We are open to our member artists right now, but only, 4 at a time can come in, and they have to, all be separated, and we have very strict protocols. But we look forward to the day when we can be open again, have our big gallery openings and all our parties and fun. We miss it so much. But instead, we are all here in this virtual room to discuss Pocho. So I am, like she said, I'm Zygot's programming administrator. I also write for the Can Journal, which is the quarterly publication of the Collective Arts Network, which is an independent group of about, I think it's 90 to 100 visual arts organizations here in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. So it includes Akron, Canton area as well. My background's in art history. I have 2 MAs in art history. One's from the University of London, and I've worked at the Wellcome Collection in London, the Cincinnati Art Museum, and I have taught art history at Cleveland State here in Cleveland, and as well at Case Western University. So now I'm going to introduce the wonderful artists that are in our exhibition. And while I'm doing that, if everyone could look to the chat, in the chat, there is a link, and I'm going to do it one more time, to the exhibition. So you can, that'll take you directly to the exhibition. I'm going to show it to you in a minute, but we'll start. I'm going to go in alphabetical order with Julia Arredondo. Is that correct? Arredondo?
Yes.
Julia. Okay. Julia Arredondo is an artist entrepreneur who recently finished her MFA at Columbia College in Chicago. She's originally from Corpus Christi, Texas, and she is heavily influenced by the small family-based businesses that she grew up around. She's formally trained in printmaking and specializes in independent forms of publishing. She founded Vice Versa Press and Curated Press, and those are her entrepreneurial debuts among many other projects. So that's Julia. Thank you for being here. Lauren Cardenas. Lauren Cardenas.
Cardenas. Yep.
Cardenas.
Yes.
Is the curator of this show. She is a studio artist who focuses on print media. Obviously, that's how she found out about us. And she is the assistant professor of printmaking at the University of Mississippi, Oxford. She was the editor and founder of Pie Crust Magazine, which was a biannual art and literary magazine based out of St. Louis. Cardenas holds a BA in painting, printmaking, and drawing from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. And she has completed the Tamarind Institute printer training program, which is awesome. And I want to ask you about that someday. And she holds an MFA in visual art from Washington University in St. Louis. Lauren, thank you so much for putting together this wonderful exhibition and being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We have Josh T. Franco here in the room, who is an artist and an art historian from West Texas. He has a PhD in art history from Binghamton University in New York, and is currently a national collector at the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian, where previously he was the Latino collections specialist. He is a working artist and an art historian, and has shown his art at CoLab Projects Austin, the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center in San Antonio, Workspace Brussels, and I could go on, but we don't have all night. So Josh, thank you so much for being here. And is it Hessler Gomez?
Hassler.
You do the American, so Hassler. Yeah. Okay. Hassler Gomez was born in Guatemala City, but has lived in the United States since he was 4. He has a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno, where he currently lives and works. He is a queer artist, and his work includes sculptural installations and performances that refer to the home, the construction site, and sacred spaces. Thank you so much for joining us from probably very warm Reno, Nevada. We're all jealous.
We're actually in the middle of a blizzard, so it's a little cold.
Oh no, that's crazy. Okay. And then finally, last but not least, Margaret Perez is a printmaker and illustrator who works with silkscreen, relief, digital collage, and installation in her work. She is currently an MFA candidate at the University of Mississippi, Oxford, a Tennessee native. She earned her BFA in illustration and design from the Memphis College of Art. In her current work, she investigates being a Mexican-American woman while also navigating and discussing the tension that brings with that in America today. Margaret, thanks so much for being here. You're here, right? You're probably muted. Okay. Margaret's here. Yeah. Okay, good. Great. So I don't know if everyone has had a chance to click on the link and take a look at the show. I'm going to show it to you right now. I'm going to share my screen just to, where is share screen? Show this lovely exhibition that was built and put together by Yana, who you met earlier. So this is the title page here, and there are links to all of the individual artists here on this page. If you scroll down, you can see the exhibition will be up until February 12th in this virtual format, and tonight obviously is the artist talk. all of the artists' work in the show can be found here on this beautiful website, which Yana built. And then the artist bios, and also, to get to the Instagrams of the artist is there. So that's what the exhibition looks like. I actually made a nice, clean PowerPoint of the work so that we can kind of, because I'm an art historian, just so we can look at them independently of all the cool graphics. So that's what I'm going to use tonight to discuss the individual works of art. But before we do that, I'm actually going to stop screen sharing for a minute, and I wanted to turn it over to Lauren. Lauren, to kind of start off our conversation tonight. I thought you could maybe talk a little bit about the genesis of this exhibition. How did this show come about?
Of course. So the inception was actually slotted for the 2019 SGCI Text Change Conference in Dallas. So that's where the conversation began. And it was for a project space that a friend of mine had started, but unfortunately that space kind of became defunct prior to the conference. And so the original show didn't happen, but I was still interested in kind of having this kind of project, this conversation to keep going. And at the time within my studio, I was kind of grappling with the idea of bifurcated identity. And so that's what initiated my kind of seeking out these different artists. So it was a 3-person show, so 2 out of the 3 remain. So that's Julia Arredondo and then Hassler Gomez. And so I asked them if they'd be interested in me applying for different places and kind of like continuing this conversation. And they both were interested. And so it was a little bit of a slow burn of an idea. And I was looking for places. The goal of the show was to be introspective and have a view of a variety of different individuals exploring this idea. And so as we kind of move forward, I was applying to different places. Zygote happened to be one of them. And then I kind of broadened the scope of adding more artists because I knew that there were more voices and who had this kind of unique relationship and a topic. But before that, it kind of started with the 2016 election, which was very much at the time, like after 2016, I was kind of having a lot of feelings. I was angry, I was scared, I was sad, and I kind of wanted to have these conversations. And I knew other artists were also doing that. So it's the conversation, I guess, in my head has been happening since 2016. And then it's kind of like come to fruition to now. But it was really important to have a variety of voices to be able to kind of talk about this topic. So.
Great, that's a perfect explanation. So then I, of course, have to ask, what does Pocho mean to you, and why, and more importantly, why did you choose that as the title of the show?
Of course. So for me, it means two halves making a whole, Mexican and American coming together to make one individual. So it's a derogatory term there, and there are plenty of derogatory words of half and half, mitad y mitad. And to be honest, I've actually never been called pocha. And I remember bringing up this topic to my parents. I've been called other words by Americans and by Mexicans, and not ever feeling enough. And it was really kind of like, I remember researching these words, and I had made a piece called Huera. And that's where I didn't want that to be that connotation, also because I immediately related it to the Beck album Güero. And so it was already in the conversation or Americanized conversation. And I was like, okay, there has to be something different. But then as I kind of kept researching, and there was just like this reclaiming of this work and like being very much of like, all right, I'm pocha, ike, like so. And so it's very much of like taking the word back. And so that's when I kept thinking like, oh, okay, like this this seems to be a little bit more appropriate. And so that's where it's kind of like the reclaiming of said word.
Got it. Got it. That's great. Awesome. Okay, so now I was going to just go through some of the works in the show and kind of address individual artists. So I was going to go alphabetical. So Julia, that means you're up first, if that's okay. I'm going to share my screen again to show the PowerPoint. Julia, do you want to pick one of your works to discuss?
Sure, let's start with Nana.
Great.
So this is an encaustic work. I'm not an encaustic artist, but I've been working with candles and devotional goods for, in a sense, well, for a while now. But I started a devotional goods business called Curandera Press in 2016. So this is a move away from commodified devotional goods like prayer candles, like burnable bundles, like ritual items. This is a piece of artwork that's a tribute to my non-familial grandmother who raised me partially. And so it's sort of an embodiment, a personified piece of work that captures her essence. She loved money. So of course, like I wanted to make a plush cross with money because she passed a couple years ago, and I was like, you know, she loved money. She loved that weird color brown. She was very earthy. She was mean, and I loved her and she loved me. And it's just a piece that came together in its own way. And so this is what Nana is about. I'm also sort of interested in charms, the aspect of charms, like not only charm bracelets, because I grew up selling Avon and things like that, but making work with sellable tiers and charms. So you could sell the base of the work, say just the square element of this piece, and then add a charm for an upcharge. So I'm in the process of reworking like my selling structure. Just a little side information.
That's very interesting, which kind of connects to my next question for you about how you have many bodies of work, you have many voices, but all of them kind of come back to, you know, the entrepreneurial side of art. And I think you've talked, I have a great quote of yours that socioeconomic diversity in the arts is really important, and you want to know what creative and career stability looks like so you can promote that path. So how has your background as a Latinx artist influenced your attention to the entrepreneurial side of art making?
I think it has more to do with like my class upbringing, being like working class and lower working class, which are definitely related to issues of race and like where I grew up. Like Corpus Christi's economy is not really flourishing, especially not for women, not for single mothers, and not for folks of color. You know, it's just the economy there, I think, inspired my journey and my family's journey into entrepreneurship more than anything. But you know, the Mexican side of my family are migrant workers, and they have always had small businesses. So I mean, it's in my blood to sort of hustle, have side hustles, but also to have formal businesses, and that is manifesting in my art as a form of class representation.
And so this piece, Gemini, I know that you're a Gemini, I'm guessing. Am I right?
Yes.
So I can see that kind of like, you know, the many voices, the many sides, but the spiritual plays obviously a huge role in your art. You talked about Querendismo, Brujeria, the Botanica. Can you talk about how those influences have all come to kind of coalesce into your work?
Sure. I mean, growing up in South Texas, again, like practices of curanderismo that are very much a part of the regional makeup of that area were just sort of naturally a part of my landscape and naturally a part of what my grandmother, what Nana would do to keep me healthy and safe. So it was really hard to ignore those practices, even when I was in the artistic institution and no one understood what I was talking about. I just, making art that involved those practices was a natural way for me to retain like those pieces of home that were at risk of being taught out of me, quite honestly. The institutions really gave me a run for my money, my identity. But I see my body as a crossroads very much, spiritually, culturally. I'm a Gemini also, so not only am I like multiracial, but I'm a million people at the same time. It's just like super complex.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I love the other piece in the show too. I just had to ask just really quickly because it's so different from the other two pieces. This body of work, your screen prints like this one, seem to refer more to like kind of traditional art historical compositions and ideas. And why does this one have the date of 1962? I just have to know.
19,
Is that not correct? Okay, maybe that's
maybe
wrong.
it's made in 2014.
Okay, good. I just had to ask you that because I was like, I'm like, what happened in 1962? I'm like trying to figure this out.
I'm gonna write that down. Like, I feel like that number is gonna come up again in the next couple days. So I'm just gonna write that down and be superstitious.
I love it. Perfect. Okay, hopefully that was a winner. So we will move on to Lauren. Thank you, Julia. And we're gonna have like a big round, round robin thing later. So Lauren,
Yes.
did you want to select a piece to talk about?
I guess, yeah, we can talk about the cheese.
It just was the first one that came
Oh,
up.
of course. Yeah.
So you use everyday objects. I really like looking at your body of work with things, not just everyday objects, but familiar objects like the kudzu series that you did, or using a Mylar emergency blanket, and then giving them, you're kind of asking the viewer to look at them differently, and you're giving them connotations about the border, about deportation, about racism, and more. So if you could talk a little bit about how this piece reflects those ideas.
Of course. So this piece actually is kind of, for me, the impetus of this conversation. It started in, I think it was 2017, 2018. I was listening to NPR and they were talking about deportation, and specifically they were interviewing individuals who had been deported and their experience. And so individuals who had never been on a plane before, who traveled across the border and then were being sent back. So this is called In-Flight Meal. It's Sueño Americano. And they were given a brown paper bag with a cheese sandwich and a bottle of water. And the man who they had interviewed, they said there was no meat, it was just American cheese. And I just kept thinking, I was like, that's the most American thing like that could be done. And especially when he talked about like not ever flying on a plane and then having this moment, which is having that luxury to be able to travel that way, is like very much, it shows of a class, it shows of a type of person. And so and these are all images of plane windows. So from that series started, I would always kind of like, if I was flying, I would take a photo of outside of like whatever image. And so this original image is above, I think it's above around Arizona, because I was at the time living in Reno, Nevada, and I was flying back to Texas. And so it seems significant. I struggled a lot with trying to figure out how to make this piece. So logistically, it was a lot of problem solving. And then I finally figured out the laser print transfer. And then I was attempting to encase it. So there are a lot of iterations of this piece. This is one of the first ones, so that's why it's encased in beeswax. So thinking about preservation and what is kind of related with that. So beeswax is used in food preservation, and kind of allowing this piece to be kind of held in a moment in time. But as they've kind of moved through or processed through this, I recently remade some of these pieces, and now I have a little bit more selection. So they're actually sandwiched in between pieces of plexiglass that resemble an airplane window. So those are the newest iterations, and those are actually in a different show. But
yeah, I wanted to ask how they have held up. I was curious about their longevity, because American cheese is so processed, it's barely food to begin with. So you have a lot of preservatives in it, but I was wondering if they do degrade. over time?
Actually, they do. So it was a bit of a learning curve. And I recently ran into some mold issues, which is very odd to have within someone's artwork. And so when I first made these pieces, I didn't have any issues. And I actually thought, I was like, oh, it's super processed. Nothing's going to happen. And then now living in the South, so there's a lot more humidity. And the first one took about 6 months to mold. And then when I recently had a show, it took maybe about 2 weeks, because within the creation of it, the mailing in the summer, and then by the time it was unpacked and then installed, the pieces had already started to grow mold. So I'm still figuring out a way that makes sense to preserve these. And so, because like you said before, in my work, I do take a lot of objects, kind of everyday objects. And so materiality and the exploration of that is really important. So I don't want it to be something that will take away from the meaning. So I'm still exploring those ideas. And I think I'm coming to terms that it might be durational.
Right.
And or being able to kind of watch that process over time. So
Right. Well, as a printmaker, I know that most printmakers are very good at problem solving with new materials and strange things.
yes.
So, but I had to ask because, of course, it demands the question. It is something that is not meant to last.
Mhm.
Let's see what else we have here. And I wanted to ask about assimilation too. It's hard to see, I'm not here with the physical object, so I'm at a disadvantage, but it does seem to me that I read the description, it's a 35 layer letterpress print. So you have obliterated whatever the letterpress was. Am I
Yes.
correct in saying that?
Yes. So they're printed on Mylar sheets. And so there are these images that I've kind of been working with for the past year. The one on the left is an image of, it looks like a young girl, and also they're taken from behind. So a young girl. So a young girl who is standing in front of, it's a particular, I'm trying to remember the cathedral in Mexico. And you also see the Mexican flag, and so they're black and white. And then the other picture on the right is me. And in both photos, we both have very long hair. I just recently cut my hair. And so it's kind of talking about this idea of my heritage. So the first layer has been printed 18 times, and then the second layer has been printed 17. So that's why it's a diptych of this separation of 17 or 18 years being in an environment with my parents and having that kind of Mexican American culture with me that was so prevalent. And then the 17 years of me kind of like not so much divorcing myself of that, but the fact that I haven't been living in Texas, living with my parents, a lot of things that I started to take for granted, such as my Spanish is becoming a lot more weaker because I don't practice every day. There are foods that I don't eat all the time, or there are kind of interactions with that culture that since I don't have a daily presence. So, and then this kind of like building up of these layers of the number of years. So, me being a 35-year-old woman, and how these kind of layers are kind of building up this person, and speaking about assimilation. And each year there is that kind of adding and taking away of one thing.
And then also the bifurcated, I mean, this is like it played out visually.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you literally can, so I'm so glad I asked about this because there's, it doesn't, again, not having the physical objects is we're at a disadvantage. So I'm so glad that you guys are here to be able to talk about these work because they're so wonderful. And we could talk, about your other piece probably for hours, but for time purposes, I'm going to move on
Yeah, of
to
course.
Josh, if that's okay.
Mhm.
Josh.
Hi.
Hi, Josh. I'm so happy to talk to an art historian and artist. Your Primitives Revenge series feature, just to let everyone know, they feature reproductions of ancient pictographs from Huecotank State Park, which is that in El Paso?
It is within the city limits of El Paso,
That's what I
technically.
thought. Okay, I haven't been, but you know. So, and then that is overlaid with hand transcribed passages from art historical texts. And I actually have a detail so you can see.
Cool.
This is from Helen Gardner's, and if like me, you've taught the 100 level art history courses for many years with good old Helen Gardner, and you can see her name is actually X'd out. And all of the texts feature the word primitive, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so you have this one and then this one, which is Wolf Lean, and every you know, PhD candidate in the world has had to read the Principles by Wolf Lean. And but I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this term primitive, because it comes up a lot in, especially if you're studying, oddly enough, modern art of the turn of the century. But as a Latinx artist, what does the word primitive connotate to you, and how does this work engage and or destroy these old paradigms?
Yeah, so first of all, it's so nice to have you in particular do that intro, because you just did so much groundwork that I don't have to do.
No problem. How could I not?
That was great. And I just wanted, like, echoing Lauren, and maybe this is also my answer anecdotally to what Pocho kind of has, what it means to me. And in my family, it kind of colloquially is used as a jokey word sometimes. I'm certainly familiar, but like Lauren is kind of half and half. I hadn't thought about it chronologically, but I'm 35 also, and moved to, I remember moving to upstate New York and having the experience of being a brown person, so in West Texas, it's like not out of the ordinary, and everybody, like, whether they like you there or not, like, knows you belong there, as a brown person and a Mexican American. But in upstate New York, people, like, and I was in my early 20s when I moved, they were asking me, like, where I was from, or when they realize they don't have a foreign accent, like where my parents are from, like assuming this really recent immigration, which was so bizarre. Because as a West Texan, a Chicano in Texas, you know, everybody knows you've been there forever. It's not like they don't ask you where you're from because you're from there. So I think that just the geography within this country is really interesting for how you see other people seeing you. But anyway, so this work. So I think I'm interested too in kind of scales that, different scales than the ones that were the realities of words like Pocho, Chicano, Mexican, the ideas of the US and Mexico as countries live. And so I look, and I mean that spatially and temporally. So spatially, it's like there's the US and there's Mexico, but there's also the Chihuahua Desert region, which doesn't care about that line. It's one region, kind of climatically, geographically, and it totally obliterates that border. So I like to say I'm Chihuahuense to communicate something in certain moments. And I've started, like, identifying that in others. So the artist Timo Faller, he's based in LA, he's great. He's also Chihuahuense, and he, like, mentioned that on Instagram or something, and it was like, oh, there's this other vector that has nothing to do with US, Mexico, that's real, totally real, and we can use. And then temporally, I just rock art. So my dissertation was about not rock art, but it kept sneaking in, and then I'm done with that. So I've been thinking about rock art, because I'm free to now, for the last 3 or 4 years. So Huecotank is a state park in West Texas and it's a site of many, it's an oasis, so a water source in the desert. So it's a site of a lot of pictographs. So these are reproductions of those, and I've been going there since, like, teenage years, many trips, and studying the rock art It's left by the Humano people, the Mogollon people, Comanche, Apache, and also the frontiers people in the 1800s who left their like names and dates, like very kind of Anglo rock marking names and dates chiseled in. So those are there too. So it's just a dense like so, and that rock art, you know, it's from a time that precedes the idea, the modernism, or which invented primitivism. So that circles back to the project. So, but I also just want to show that they're also made on a rock. So they're all kind of, this is a silbata, stone grinder. My dude's an Indian food like specialist, and this, I stole this, I co-opted it. It's not for food anymore.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you actually used that to create these works?
Yeah, it's watercolor pastels, and they're all done with forward layers. I found that to be in the brink between going muddy and being complicated and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all, yeah, watercolor pastels, basically frottage on this stobata and then washed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. And but talking about bifurcated, you know, like this has the, you know, the canon of ivory tower art history being obliterated by your other half, right?
So
Like,
yeah.
like I love this idea of this, you know, half and half, this you know, I just didn't really think about it. But one thing I have thought about your work is the humor in your work. I don't know, has anyone ever, I mean, I'm sure people have, you have a very like kind of cunning sense of humor to your work, and nothing I think says that more than the video that you created, the art
yeah.
which I actually have here. I mean, I looped all of them together. So there's like, they're just kind of flowing.
Amazing.
And you're calling this dancing with the primitives, right? So do you want to talk about your dancing a little bit?
Sure.
Are you gonna do a little for us? You promised.
There was a question mark actually.
Okay.
So this, yeah, well, I want to say something too about the art history part. So, you know, there's the territory of US and Mexico that this whole show is built around, and we're all, you know, are working through. For me, there's also the territory of art history. And this is just one of the acts of me dealing with that too. So how do I, a Chicano from West Texas, inherit this, you know, Austro-German rooted discipline? And how do I how do I put myself in the lineage of Heinrich Wolflin? So that's just another territory. But these, yeah, dancing. So this, I had a residency at Elsewhere Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, and one of the former residents there was Lonnie Hawley, a great sculptor and artist, and he had two works. Everybody leaves a permanent work installed there. So his were in one room, and I spent a lot of time there because I just love his work, but a lot of time meditating on it. And one day I just made all these dance videos, and they weren't what I produced for the residency. I just have them. And then they ended up meeting Lonnie Hawley and having a Zoom with him, and I got to show him the videos, and he said, "Oh, that what you're doing is studying and jamming, and there's nothing wrong with studying and jamming." So I like the idea of engaging the body and study and looking is what these are about, and just kind of taking that and going wild. So this is me doing it with my own work, which is different than doing it with somebody else's, you know. So I'm really just still unpacking these. So feedback on these is welcome because I made them for this.
Well, when I saw them, I immediately pictured myself dancing in these like sacred art historical places that you would totally not be allowed to do that, but how joyous and wonderful it would feel to be in front of like Las Meninas, like just rocking it out. But you know, there's way too many people and it just wouldn't happen. So there's that. So I thought about that. But then I also, of course, jumped to the idea of dancing as cultural expression of your, you know, of your heritage, and also then the dancing on the prehistoric level as well, which is part of ritual. So I just loved it. And there's still that sense of humor, right? Because you could take this very seriously, but I love that you also don't have to, right?
Yeah.
You know, kind of plays to both. But
I'm embarrassed I'm wearing tie-dye right now while this is also
but it's not the same shirt, so you're cool. So thank you, Josh. Got to move on. Sorry, I want to talk to all of you so much. Okay, so we are moving on to Hassler. Hassler. Hi, Hassler. I have your work here. Start with this one, which was actually the cover shot for the exhibition and was on all of our promotional materials. And I'm going to just go through them quickly, just to show. Now, I sneaked onto your Instagram and saw that you snuck onto a construction site to take this photo. I thought made it even more, because, you know, it's so hard, again, without the physical objects to enjoy them. But to see it, I thought maybe you had the plywood installed onto the walls of a gallery. But no, I love the fact that this was kind of like Renegade. You know, you went in and did that. But looking at your work, the common theme, there's many common themes, obviously, but your work utilizes materials that are commonly found on construction sites. And but you've repurposed them into this kind of fine art context and giving them kind of a new look. They're almost camouflaged in a way. You know, you look at this paper, you wouldn't know that, you'd think maybe this is artist made paper, but it's actually just tar paper, you know, the tar paper that you would buy at Home Depot, right? So you've put these into a fine art context, but what do these materials mean to you and your heritage?
So I think materiality is really important in my art practice. I've grown up around construction sites, you know, pretty much everyone in my family works in some form of construction. But it was most significantly right when I was graduating in 2017. I'm undocumented and I have DACA. My DACA overlaps, so I couldn't legally work in the United States. So it was at this precarious moment where I just graduated with 2 degrees, kind of this American dream that that right after, you know, you're supposed to get a job and your life's supposed to be great and you reach the American dream. But because I couldn't legally work because my DACA overlaps, I had to get an illegal job working in construction for a concrete company. And it was this experience that I'm indebted to a lot, because I had always seen, you know, what my dad and what my family members went through working on construction sites always secondhand. It's very different actually having to be the one who poured the cement, who had to finish the cement, who had to use their body in that way. But I think the benefit was that because I did have access to the education I did, I could think about it, I could theorize in a very different way, to where there's this thing that I feel towards these materials that for me, they do feel precious. You know, when you look at the tar paper, it just goes on your roof and you never even really notice that there's lines on it. Or when you look at concrete, you don't really think about whose hands were the ones that finished it, so then just you could walk on top of it. So for me, these materials, there's a beauty in their simplicity, but also in the fact that they are so often overlooked, but they construct, you know, our everyday realities, the houses we live in, the schools we go to, the buildings we work in.
Right. And you even insert your body into this piece in particular by this is actually a documentation of a performance where you actually used your body to kind of were you trying to write actual words, or was it just more, can you just talk a little bit about the performance? I wish I could have seen the performance, but we're looking at the document.
So as far as my performance, I should give some context. My performances have never actually been viewed. I am very insistent on them almost being like ghost performances, in this allusion to this labor that is really often not viewed, or even if it is viewed, it's overlooked. So my performances have only ever been documented once, and it was for one of these drawings, but it was one that was 23 feet long. So I wanted to document that one just because of the endurance factor of it. But when I make these, I blindfold myself with a sliver of the American flag, and then I place a permanent marker stick in my mouth. And when I start it, there is a word or a phrase, but as I begin to perform the action, it's really about the breakdown of the language.
Got it. Yeah, I figured there had to be like a connection to language words, American, Spanish, all of these things working working together, but no, Mark, not yet. I wanted, so now hearing that you were working at a concrete company, concrete has played a part in many of your works over the years. And this is obviously a photograph of 7 big gulp cups that you cast in concrete. And I do see the markings on them, which are similar to the, markings, but your work has a very elegiac quality. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in a very beautiful way. You have death masks, monuments, totems, memories, these big gulp casts, you say, are markers for the departed. So can you speak a little bit about how your work connects to loss and your personal history?
So all of this work comes from a series that's called In the Land of Milk and Honey, which I've been working on since pretty much the end of 2017. But the big old cups, they started as just a material study. Growing up, I've always gone to 7-Eleven and drank the horchata that they have, which is really gross, but it's kind of good at the same time. So I just had a lot of these cups lying around, and so one day I just poured concrete into them, and then I removed the cup, being that the mold. And I was really interested in just the materiality, the surface of it. But right when I started doing that, my great grandmother died, and she was the first person in my lifetime that has died from my family. And that sense of loss, I had never experienced it before, but it's further enhanced because I am undocumented. I can't leave the country to go visit them. And since then I've lost, just last year, I lost 3 of my grandparents, just natural causes. And again, it's this wanting to be able to be there or to mark the fact that they existed. So these are called unnamed monuments. And I was thinking about this idea of what constitutes a monument. Often it's, a bronze, and it's expensive and it's expansive and it takes a lot of space and it draws attention. But I'm often interested in these actions that I often say are pathetic, not in a sense that, they're not worth performing, but in the pathos of them. This idea that I can't build, a monument for the people that I've known that are now departed, that people, never really knew of them or their stories. But I was really interested in what the monuments always sit on, which are those concrete plinths. So I wanted to make these kind of versions of these mini plinths. But I was also thinking about this tradition of libations, it's kind of this ancient practice of pouring out drink for the departed, but then how that turns into the colloquialism of pouring one out for the homies, but wanting to make that solid, wanting to make this marker. And it's all my work has kind of become as these markers of literal and metaphoric deaths, almost as a way of creating these historical objects for myself, because I come from this place where I feel like I don't really have access to my history. So it's me almost recreating these fake archaeological objects to serve as kind of that bridge between my ancestors and myself.
Wonderful. It's really, really powerful work. And I've been snooping your, Instagram, and seeing these in a gallery setting is very different from seeing them laying in a field like this. So I would encourage everyone to visit his Instagram, because he's got some very great shots of these in a very different context.
That's where all the secrets are.
That's where all the secrets are. Right. Perfect. Thank you, Hassler, so much. I could talk to you for hours, but we got to move on. Margaret.
Hi.
Hi, Margaret. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So Margaret, chinga la migra, which for the non-Spanish speakers means fuck the border control, which I was so happy because I'm not a Spanish speaker. So here I am, like total nerd, typing this into Google, and it came back and I was like, yes, fuck the border control, indeed. And which obviously, if you look at this image, even quickly, you can see the kind of iconography that you're using speaks to that. So you have chain link fences, you have the helicopters, you even have some coronaviruses I see flitting around in there. So how does your work like this, and also it being a triptych, has a very kind of Western art altar type connotation to it too. But how does all of this reflect your kind of your bifurcated Mexican and American identity?
Yeah, so sort of beginning with this, I throughout my like art career as a BFA and even before then, I was never before now really encouraged to kind of explore this half of myself. Like I grew up in a divorced family. My father, who is Mexican, I was really apart from him, and I grew up with my mother. So that's sort of like half and half of myself was never really encouraged to be explored or, you know, talked about. But now as an MFA, sort of going into and attaining that, that's kind of what I'm exploring now. And particularly within the past few years, sort of jumping off of what Lauren kind of addressed with the election and, you know, everything coming to a head kind of in 2020, 2019. I was really frustrated and angry. And I was constantly looking at articles in news media, and the particular, you know, articles about these sort of forced sterilizations were things that really stuck out to me, and just, they were just a lot to take in. So a lot of this work is me just kind of processing that, and me being represented both in this, but also as the kind of eyes, just like everyone else is, these eyes looking in and watching these things happen and not really being able to do a whole lot about it. But yeah, that was kind of me processing these things, and just processing all of these feelings that I have a hard time connecting with a little bit sometimes, but just sort of my way of doing that.
And now that you've said that, I'm seeing more things in these. Like, for example, in the central image on either side of the skull, there is a Baroque Dutch painting, and I believe that's an anatomist, is it? Right. So performing a surgery on what was probably, you know, a lower class individual and someone, you know, degenerate or something like that. And then on the other side of it, flanking it, you have, you know, the border control access only sign. So in a way, I guess I wanted to ask you about, not only do you have these art historical reference, but you have a lot of animal imagery in here.
Yeah.
And looking at your past work, and actually, sorry, the other work in the show, which is a really beautiful relief print. Is this actually cut out of the paper and then pasted onto the wall?
Yeah, so this print is a really big one. I actually don't remember the actual dimensions because it seems to get bigger every time it's installed, but it's an installation, and the pieces are actually all separate. So all of the wings and the bodies and the snake are all separate parts. So I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's like 7 pieces to this, but it's installed on a wall. And with a lot of the things that I was doing before I came to the University of Mississippi to get my MFA, I was working a lot with this sort of fable and animal figures and this sort of making things that are difficult to talk about, or maybe not something people really want to look at, more palatable in the way that fables kind of do. And this piece was one of those kind of things, like thinking about, you know, this sort of half and half of me. So the top is a golden eagle with the snake on the Mexican flag. And then the bottom is this sort of American eagle. And there's this kind of fight going on. But yeah, using these sort of animal figures to represent this kind of push and pull, or this fight between, you know, myself sometimes, and then, you know, between America and the United States, or Mexico and the United States, with, you know, all the border patrol, all of these sort of, you know, build the wall propaganda, and, you know, living in Trump's America.
Not anymore.
Thank God.
Thank God. So could I just ask you technically, what kind of a relief print is this? Do you work with wood or linoleum?
So I work with pretty much anything I can get my hands on. I did do a lot of linoleum work. So this is like half linoleum, and then the other half of it's actually on MDF, which is not quite as thick as wood, but it doesn't splinter as badly.
Right. And so you're saying this is huge, right? See, this is the other, we're at another loss here without being, as an art historian, I so want to be with these objects. So you're like as tall as a person?
So it's taller than me. I'm 5'1" on a good day. So it's much taller than me. But yeah.
Right. Oh, that puts it in a completely different context for me. So I'm so glad that I got to talk to you about this. But as I can see, how are we doing on time? Okay, 7 o'clock, right on time to do our kind of discussion. So I'm going to go stop share for a second and do this. So I kind of wanted to open it up to all of the artists here and have a kind of larger, just maybe 15-minute discussion about having all of these Latinx artists who are identifying with this concept of Pocho, Pocha in the room. What does it mean because of what we're going through right now, because of the social political climate of 2021? What does it mean for you all to be a Latinx artist working in this kind of precarious moment in American history with regards to the border, with regards to the coronavirus, with regards to everything? I kind of want to just open the discussion to you all about this moment, you know, what this work means in this moment. Maybe Lauren, you could get the ball rolling. Yeah, see, I'm that's the professor in me calling on someone.
No worries. Sure. So to be honest, it's been a little uneasy. So kind of like what Julia kind of brought up in the beginning of like grad school kind of not being a fertile ground, at least for me when I was in graduate school. I wasn't really coached on talking about identity. And so it was very, prior to this work, my work kind of avoided that. If I did talk about identity, it was really subtle. And a lot of the work that I made maybe in the past was much more minimal. The identity aspect came, it wasn't secondary, but it was very much just for me. And so my audience didn't really get to see that. But as of lately, it's been nice to kind of process some of these concepts currently. So utilizing that. And so, because I've always had this internal conflict, I think it became more apparent as I grew older and things were kind of brought to my attention. But it was just very much kind of in passing. It was just, but I think I had to be taken out of the context of not being in Texas and living in the Midwest for 10 years or like kind of being outside. And then 2016 really just kind of like, I don't want to say it really just kind of hit me. And so there was just all of these feelings of like being angry, being scared, being sad. And at the time I was living in Reno. And so I was really far away from home. And I was in a new space. I was developing new relationships. And so it kind of allowed me to question things by myself. And that's kind of like been the current that I've been kind of questioning, like, what does it mean to be American? And that's really the question I've been asking within my studio. And having those conversations with my parents, and it's really funny because they're very much of like, I don't understand why you're having this conflict. And so and asking more questions about culture and about heritage, because now it's just something that it's not with me all the time. So I'm making much more of an effort to connect with it or reconnect with it again. So
I think, Julia, you mentioned, I think something you all have in common is that you all kind of went through some sort of an like academic art world training. And Julia, I think you said they tried to pound it out of you. And I think, Margaret, you mentioned, you know, it was just not something that you were addressing in your work. So Julia, can you talk more about that?
Sure. I mean, academia is predominantly affluent and white. So entering academia as not as like as a culturally ambiguous person is precarious, right? Just like my identity is. So being able to have conversations about like the history of Chicano art in my particular school, it just wasn't happening. And also talking about sales, talking about sustainable practices as a working class artist, that wasn't happening. And that was being shunned because it was uncomfortable because no one knew how to talk about it. So, you know, ever since I was a kid, I had to really research my identity and the creative practices that went along with my cultural heritage on my own. And so libraries and my private practice just really helped me understand who I was in that way, because, you know, my family's always working and just so busy. I was learning about my culture, but it wasn't like we were having discussions about it. You know, we weren't talking critically about our identity. But after the election, actually, Chicago was really, I'm in Chicago right now. I was in Chicago during the election. Chicago's like Chicano and Latinx creative scene is the bomb. And in 2016, like I had just moved here recently, like Pilsen's community, the South Side, they really accepted me, you know, even though I was still struggling with being a mixed kid. They were like, oh, no, you're one of us. And I was like, damn, that feels so good. Because that wasn't the way it was when I was a kid. You know, I was like the only gringa in the family. And so they made me realize that from a really young age. You know, I grew up around a lot of like super dope ass people, but I was always the white girl. And so it was really nice to have a community be like, no, like you're one of us. And I was like, shit, man, that feels so freaking good. And so the community just really helped me understand. It helped me for the first time understand my identity within a conversational context, within a community. So that was nice. Of course, now it's pandemic, so I'm having to go back inside and do it solo again. But that was my most valuable learning experience about my identity, definitely outside of academia.
Margaret, can you relate to that, to the not, you know, not exploring that side of yourself or feeling that push-pull between the two parts of yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So, like growing up, I grew up and went to school when I was little in rural Tennessee. And, you know, elementary and earlier, you know, little kids don't see differences really. But then, you know, moving forward into middle and high school, like, you know, I wasn't different to myself at all until I was to them. And it was really something that was brought out as I got older. And then I was really excited to go to art school when I finally got to college. You know, I was excited to be in Memphis. I was excited, you know, I was like, okay, there's going to be people, you know, that are kind of like me and it's going to be great. And then there wasn't. And in the sort of like environment that I was in, it wasn't necessarily discouraged to talk about, you know, heritage or culture or race, but it also wasn't really encouraged. And then I was still in school during the 2016 election. And I just remember that like whole day being horrible. And, you know, most people felt the same as me, but I actually had a roommate who I really didn't know was kind of a Trump supporter at the time. So that made things really tedious. But then I got to the University of Mississippi, and Lauren is actually the one who's kind of encouraged me to kind of explore all of these things that I've never really been, you know, encouraged to look at or, you know, supported to look at. And it's been really, really nice. And I've found a voice that I didn't think that I had, which has been really, really awesome. So I'm extremely fortunate to have that kind of a support system.
That's great. Hey, Josh, were you in DC in 2016?
Yeah, I was. I had just moved here in 2015. So, you know, I was just thinking about this today. DC is such a, the poor town, like as a town, is in such a bad place because the culture just radically shifts every 4 or 8 years. And it's like whiplash. So I watched the transition from the end of Obama to Trump. But I think in this last 5 years and in this last year, you know, a lot of my West Texas is a very conservative place, and a lot of my family voted for Trump, and so this neoconservative Christian nationalist Latinx Venn diagram, you know, ideology, sentiment is on my mind a lot. That's just like a whole other panel to talk about that, but that's on my mind. And then, yeah, I think that was the question, right, Brittany?
Yeah, that was the question. Well, I was
Like,
just curious if you had a different experience, during 2016. I think we all, everywhere, anyone that is reasonable had the kind of same reaction. But then Hassler, like, I mean, it's like life or death for you, like the stakes are so much higher for someone like you, and who is undocumented. And so I think about this a lot, and I'm sure that you're not like, how many fine artists are undocumented out there?
I know of one.
There you go.
That's about it.
Right, but there's probably a lot, but that are excluded from, fancy panel discussions and things like this. Josh, pipe in.
Yeah.
Well, no, I just wanted to like actually do this like with Lauren. So about the training, and you asked about our institutionalization, which is an interesting thread with all of us. Lauren and I met in the context of a very white college that I loved a lot, had an amazing experience. But it's kind of funny, and Lauren, I'm glad you reached out, because it's really funny to be reconnecting with you on these terms, which we didn't have so much space for at Southwestern. We were like not doing this conversation, even though we easily could have been.
No,
So
of
I
course.
think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like throughout most of my time in school, it was very much of like having that talking about identity ended up being like, I think at the time it was more looked at as diaristic, and like being diaristic was taboo or not.
But we weren't taking on the identity of art kid. Like that was something really building consciously.
Yeah. No, of course that, yeah, we went to a small liberal arts college where my graduating class, we had 6 art majors. So and it was very much of this predominantly, it was either white or it was like individuals of color, because within that, yeah, the conversation was really kind of limited. And then the voices were also limited as well. So
well, I mean, even the term Latinx, Latinx, wasn't in the common vernacular. I mean, even for me, until really, I can't even remember, it can't even have been 4 years ago, maybe, where it really entered into the discourse. But now that term, I'm kind of curious I mean, we talked about Pocho and what that means, but like, what about this term Latinx? Like, what does that mean for you? Does that work for you? What kind of work does it do for you? Do you like it? Do you hate it? I'm curious.
I like it. I have just 2 points that I go over. I like it because it's like algebra, the X can be substituted with anything. And then the X as a gender commentary, I don't like when it's described as gender neutral, because I don't want to be neutered. I like the textures and diversity of junks and desire and erotics that we all, are. So I always insist it's not gender neutralizing, it's gender fucking. So those are my thoughts on Latinx. I want to hear other people's too.
Julia, anyone?
I guess like my relationship towards the word is almost kind of my relationship towards when we create a show that's built around kind of a sense of identity, is that it's really comforting. And right now when everyone's talking about the work and being like, oh, the connections that can be within all these works, even though we come from different perspectives. But I also think it's there's always a little bit of trepidation where it's like, we are this, but we are also much more than just this. This is a point of where we can meet, but I think it's important to not just stay
there. Thoughts? Julia, I see your brain working.
That was good. Damn, that was dope. For me, like Latinx feels like a very hybrid term, and I definitely identify as a hybrid in many ways, even like gender fluid. I'm very gender fluid. But sort of thinking about AIM names and Instagram handles, I'm very into subculture, and subculture has sort of been my haven since I can't identify specifically with one side of my culture all the time. And so I think back to like hardcore music and the handles that we would give ourselves on Instant Messenger, and it would be like XXX, bunny ears, XXX. And so for some reason, like Latinx, it makes me nostalgic for that period of my life as well.
I like that. Margaret, what do you think about that word? Do you use it?
So I have used it in the past. I kind of agree with that whole, like, I like using it as a term to sort of bring together as this sort of meeting point. But I mean, I've always kind of just referred to myself as Mexican American. I think it's really kind of at the disposal of whoever is identifying to kind of choose. So that's just kind of how I feel.
Right. Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, for me, especially being an academic and being like a teacher, and like just having, especially the younger generation, like coming up and having them decide their own identity and having something that kind of brings everyone together, and me not making that decision for them. That's kind of where I've started to take these on, because it's not my place to do that. And especially within like Latin American culture, there is this kind of, or at least like growing up, there was this like machismo and like knowing your place as like a woman and a female or a male, and like having that. And so kind of moving beyond that and making it comfortable for individuals like in that conversation.
Right. I mean, these terms, as an art historian, I'm sure Josh can relate to this. Whenever someone assigns a blanket term for anything, one should be wary. But I love what Hassler said about this place where everyone can meet together and then start, and then let's go. You know, let's all meet here. And if you choose to use it and embrace it, then great. And if you don't, you can at least know you're in a safe space, right? Like you're amongst like-minded people. And it's just a discussion that is so important. I mean, especially in academic realms. But we're seeing more and more of it. I mean, this exhibition, for example, it's the first show that Zygote has had of all Latinx artists in one place. So we're happy to start the conversation here. I mean, Cleveland has a rich and diverse and wonderful culture. Oh, and Celeste Rios feels like I have a lot to share. No, that's great. She has a question. I forgot there's other people here other than me and my own names. She said, I have a question. I used to be really creative and artistic, but life happened. Coming from a full-time worker and student, how can I get back into my art? I feel like I have to find my identity again. And this is something I think that Hassler, you're talking about, like, you know, and all of you, maybe your families, or Julia, your families were busy working, right? And when you don't come from a place of privilege, art is a luxury, you know, you have to work. So I think what Celeste is asking is like, how do you get back into it? How do you find the time?
I want to push back on the idea that art is a luxury, and one comes from rock art. You know, a lot of the pigment, the binder for the pigment in rock art is animal fat, which implies that people made a choice about their sustenance resources and chose rather than to take it into their bodies to use it to make those images. And in the present day, I think, you know, this is what, as a Chicano, I have rasguachismo, the magic power of rasguachismo available to me, which is my grandfather, who worked in a power plant, low-level job his whole life, created these beautiful environments from found objects and all throughout his front and backyards, and made this like beautiful kind of fantastical sculptural installation place for us to grow up in. So I always push back when I hear that concept put in the air.
Good. Very important. Art is not just, you know, in galleries. Art can be all around us. And then one last question. Could you also talk about what you've been working on during COVID and if your work has changed because of it? Now, Julia, now I'm going to go to you because you've done a big body of work during COVID. Can you talk just really quickly about that?
Sure. I've been working on DIY broadcasting projects. So I started this like DIY version of QT or QVC, like the Home Shoppers Network. And I would feature local Chicago artisans, but we would sell the things that QVC was too afraid to sell. So like cannabis infused personal lubricants. We even had a drug dealer on there like a month ago, which was pretty wild. All right, I'll admit that was pretty wild. And then we also had a community broadcasting salon that was called COVID TV, which was another DIY broadcasting experiment. It was very interesting. I do just want to like Celeste Rios. I think it was Celeste or Celeste Rios. I don't want to prescribe any advice, but like you already know who you are. You know who you are. Maybe like it's just a matter of finding some time to just like reflect on that and finding just some time to write. Writing really helps me every day. And I lose myself all the time and I get too busy all the time. But there's a lot of value in that too. Like for all the artists who have the privilege to just chill out and make art all the time, they don't have that resource that's so valuable that you do, and that's life experience. And so I hope that you can channel that and really let that shine. It sounds like you've got a lot of that. So that's my bit. Thanks.
And if anyone else has any questions in the room, we have 10 minutes till 7:30 left for questions. If anybody has any, you can just pop them in the chat, or if you want to jump on and actually ask. If not, I will continue to talk. Everyone's saying thank you. So this was such a great opportunity and a wonderful discussion that I could, like I said, all of your work, I could have spent, an hour talking to each of you about each of your works. So just having this time with you has been really special. So thank you to all of you, and for all of you to be here too. That's extra bonus awesome. So thank you all. Thank you, Lauren, for bringing this group together, and to bring it to Cleveland is so important. Cleveland has such a strong community of Latinx artists and people. And so we were really, had high hopes about doing a lot of fun things with the show and outreach, but this is just the beginning of the conversation. So we will go on from here. And also, if anyone after this wants to revisit this talk, we will be uploading it onto YouTube. I've recorded it. So it will be available to share with your students or whoever. And also, if anyone has any further questions for any of the artists, feel free to email me. It's Brittany@zygotepress.org. And I'd be happy to forward any questions, that maybe you were too intimidated to ask here in the room. I'd be happy to get in touch with Lauren and get the answers for you. So thanks again, everyone. I'm going to sign off and say goodnight. I don't know why we all wave at the end of a Zoom, but that's what we do. This is 2021. Thank you, everyone. It's so great to meet you. And hopefully we'll see you at Zygote sometime in the future when it's safe. Bye, everybody.